In this section, we're going to start walking through the setup of Flutter on macOS. So if you are running Windows, then skip this video, continue on to the next section where you'll see some videos on setting up Flutter on a Windows machine. All right, so if you're still here, I'm going to assume that you are on macOS and you're ready to go through the setup. On the screen right here, I've got a diagram of exactly how we're going to go about this. We're going to first install a tool called the Flutter CLI, which is what we use to generate new Flutter apps and actually run them for testing purposes on our own laptop. Once we go through that initial setup process, we'll then do some setup for either Android or iOS. Now, between Android and iOS, if you're running macOS, you can install the set, or you can go through the setup for either of these or both of them if you want to. Throughout the entire course, you're going to see me mostly making use of the Android emulator for testing out all of our applications. There's not necessarily any good reason for that. I could have just as well done the rest of this course all with iOS if I had chosen to. Okay, so let's get to it. We're going to first begin by installing the Flutter CLI. We're going to navigate to the Flutter homepage at flutter.io inside of our browser. So I'm going to pull that up right now, flutter.io. And then once here, I'm going to find the blue Get Started button on this page. I then get prompted to go through the installation process. And of course, we're going to go through the installation on Mac OS. All right, so this is where things start getting interesting. You're going to see that there are a tremendous number of steps to go through to do this entire setup. And unfortunately, it's kind of accurate. We do have to do a pretty hefty amount of startup. Now I'm going to begin by first scrolling it down a little bit. And I'm going to find the section marked as Get the Flutter SDK. And inside this section, you'll see a link to a zip file that you can download. So I'm going to click this to start the download process. Now, this is a rather large file, so we're going to pause the video right here. We're going to come back in the next section and start making use of this zip file. In the last section, we downloaded the Flutter SDK, and we're now ready to extract it onto our local machine. So here's the process of what we're going to do. We just did the download. We're now going to take that zip file and we're going to move it to a workspace directory on our local machine. Now, when I say workspace right here, I don't mean to say that this is going to be a folder that has to be called workspace. It could be called my code or my projects or whatever you want it to be. It's just some folder on your local machine where you normally store code. So I personally call it workspace, because that's what I call the folder where I store all the different projects that I'm working on at any given time. But again, it does not have to be called workspace. Once we move that zip file over, we're then going to extract the zip, and then we're going to do a little bit of setup for something called our path variable to make sure that it includes that new directory that we are creating. So let's move on to the second step right here. I'm going to pull open the download directory. So here's my downloads folder. I've got the zip file that we just downloaded right here. And then I have a second Finder window open. Again, this is open up to my workspace directory, or just whatever location you have on your local computer that you use to store code. I'm going to take the zip file, I'm going to move it over to this workspace directory, and then I can double-click the zip file to extract the contents into this directory. Now, doing that extraction process takes a minute or two. So for the sake of time, I actually already went ahead and did it. So after you do that extraction, you should see a new folder inside of whatever your workspace directory is called simply Flutter. If you open this up, you'll see a collection of different files and folders inside there. And so this is everything that we need to generate and run new Flutter projects. Now we're not done just yet. We still have to do a little bit more setup for our path variable. So let's take a quick break right here, come back to the next section, and we'll continue with that setup.